It's this idea that Britain is somehow suspect, that there's something wrong with us, that our history is flawed, that other countries are inherently better. I think that is a disease that philosophers have called oikophobia, and I think it's a very apt description of the mindset of Starmer, Hermer and the others. I'm Allister Heath, and once again I'm responding to some of the excellent reader comments on my latest article on how oikophobia is helping to erase Britain. We begin this week with a comment from Jane Britton, who says, "You've summed up the essence of the warped minds of Starmer, Hermer and the other Brit haters, Allister. I cherish my country, its values and customs, and detest those who want to strip our culture away when those same despicable leftists are obsessed with the rights and sensitivities of those who wish to harm us. My parents both loved and served their country. Is it for the likes of these people?" Well, thank you. I think the problem is that Starmer and Hermer really love international institutions. They love the idea of international law. They think the nation state is basically a bad construct, and they want to shift power from the nation state to these international organisations. We saw that, of course, with Starmer, who never recognised Brexit, who fought against it when he was in opposition, and who's now trying to undermine it whenever he can. We can also see that with the Chagos betrayal, where the aim quite clearly is to weaken Britain, to decolonise at any cost, even if that means handing power over to the Chinese directly or indirectly. It's this idea that Britain is somehow suspect, that there's something wrong with us, that our history is flawed, that other countries are inherently better, that a different kind of governance whereby international bureaucrats, the global blob basically, are superior and need to be treated better than the UK. And I think that is a disease that philosophers have called oikophobia. And I think it's a very apt description of the mindset of Starmer, Hermer and the others. The next question comes from Matt Brown, who says, "I voted for the man, but I've never regretted a decision more. I despise him more than anyone else. I feel utterly betrayed, and I don't understand what his problem is with people like me whose ancestors have walked this land as far as records go back. I hate him and we need to get him out as soon as possible before this land as we knew it is lost entirely." Well, Matt, I'm sorry you voted for Keir Starmer for the Labour Party. I think that was a terrible mistake, as you now agree. I'm not quite sure why you thought it wasn't at the time, given your views, but there you go. I think the problem with Starmer really is that he doesn't understand the philosophical underpinnings of modern Britain. These philosophical underpinnings come from a 700 or 800 year quest whereby powers have been taken away from the monarch, who used to be obviously an absolute monarch, and handed to the people either directly in the sense of rights to property, to free speech, to have a trial by jury, that kind of thing, or to Parliament. And we saw a democratisation of this country in the 19th, 20th century. The problem now is that Starmer doesn't really like any of this. He's willing to cancel local elections. More than 4 million people are not going to be able to vote at the forthcoming local elections who should have been able to vote. Their elections have been delayed by a year, 2 years, possibly more, which is an outrage and a scandal. Starmer has no interest in trial by jury. He wants to get rid of most of that. He's obsessed with controlling devices like digital ID cards, cameras that can recognise you, weaponising facial recognition, that sort of stuff. And I think that entire agenda is fundamentally anti-British in the sense that it goes against the old traditions of the old Labour Party. Even the old socialists on the Labour Party side in the 1940s all the way to 1990s understood. People like Tony Benn believed in democracy and free speech. Keir Starmer doesn't. People like Tony Benn were Eurosceptics. Obviously Keir Starmer loves the EU. And I think it's a real tragedy, really. And I think it's a giant intellectual error. It's based on the premise that Britain and the West are the worst possible countries, really, and that they need to be radically changed beyond any recognition. And I think that's a mistake. I think this whole idea is completely flawed. I think, of course, there are terrible things that Western countries have done in the past. There are terrible things that some of them continue to do. But the answer is reform, not year zero. The answer is reform, not to destroy everything we have. The next point comes from Jonathan Evans, who says, Starmer is prepared to destroy the UK by promoting international law, especially the ECHR above British law, even when it is clearly against British interests, as we have seen in the Chagos deal. Automatic rights also including benefits for illegal immigrants, and now this lengthy pursuit of British soldiers doing their jobs in difficult overseas postings. He and his psychic Homer have to go. The Labour Party should close ranks against them. The electorate already has. If possible, they should be charged with offences under the Treason Act, etc. Well, I don't think they should be charged with anything, certainly not treason or anything like that. I don't believe in any of that. I believe one can have rational disagreements with people without wanting to judge them. But I do think that it is a catastrophe the way the Human Rights Brigade have tried to hound soldiers doing their jobs in very difficult circumstances, be it in Northern Ireland or in Iraq or elsewhere. And I think it's part of a far left agenda which basically wants to make it too risky for people to serve in the armed forces, and basically to turn the army into a branch of the social services that deals with, flooding and other kinds of emergencies of that nature, perhaps peacekeeping at best, but certainly not the nasty and difficult business of real war. It's a sort of pacifist, anti-war, anti-nation state perspective. Now, very few people actually believe in this ideology in its entirety, but I think it's affected a lot of these human rights lawyers. That's really the only possible explanation of what they're trying to do. They're trying to make sure that the ECHR and legal rulings govern soldiers even when overseas, which was something that was never envisaged when these sorts of agreements were put in place to try and protect minorities or to prevent some of the horrors we saw during the Holocaust. So I think it's a catastrophe, really. It's an intellectual error. It's a capture of the Labour Party by a small cadre of far-left activists. And I think it's right. I think the Labour Party needs to reject all of that. It needs to go back to where it used to be, which is not madly in love with human rights law. But I fear it's never going to happen. I fear too many people at the top of the Labour Party agree with this kind of nonsense, which 80% or 90% of the population reject. And I see other parties captured by it too, for example, the Greens. So I think what we really need on the left of British politics is a return to the kind of blue Labour values, the sorts of values whereby you could like the armed forces, you could respect the armed forces and still be on the left in other ways. And I think until we see a return of that philosophy at the top of the Labour Party, we're going to see more of this madness, and this is not going to help the party's electoral prospects. The next question or comment is from William Spinks, who says, "It's all well and good declaring that Starmer is an oikophobe, but what are you journalists going to do about it? And there is a never-ending declaration that Starmer has ruined the country and has traitorous ways, but we the public are suffering." Well, what I'll say about this is this. Journalists' job is to write what they think is true. They need to report the facts as they see them or publish opinions about those facts. And that's exactly what I'm doing. It's obviously not the job of journalists to be politicians. It's the job of the electors to vote in the way they think is right. So I think blaming journalists for not doing enough here is not the answer. I think what is needed is a renaissance of mass political activism in Britain. I think a lot more people need to get involved in political parties, be they of the left or be they of the right. I think we need a lot more attention to politics. I think people need to discuss it a lot more. In some countries, there's a much more advanced political culture than in Britain, where many people simply switch off for 3, 4, 5 years, depending on the electoral cycle, and only really engage a few days before general elections. I think that's a mistake. I think we need a much more engaged public. I think we need far more people involved in politics. I think we need more people standing for office. And I just think we need more debate and discussion, because otherwise what you see is a political system captured by minority views and an oppression of the majority by the minority, which never makes any sense. The next comment is from Nicholas Hazelton, who says, "I fear it may be too late already, Allister. Starmer and his party are totally unfit to govern. It amazes me that a country like Britain, with so many gifted and talented people, has such inept weaklings as MPs. How has this been allowed to happen?" Well, I think there's a very powerful point here, which is a decline in the quality of MPs. I think in the 60s, 70s and 80s, maybe even 90s, the average quality of MPs was much higher. I think there are a number of reasons for that. The first is pay. Pay, I'm afraid to say, is too low for MPs compared to what these people could get in other jobs. The second is the level of scrutiny. A lot of people just don't want to be scrutinised. They'd rather go and earn money in the private sector, in a hedge fund or wherever, and not have to put up with the level of criticism we see today, especially in an extremely divided society. The third point really is that a lot of people have just lost trust in the system. And I think this third element is very important. I think we need to reform the system to enable clever, bright people who want to give years of their lives to serve their country the ability to change things. People see Rishi Sunak and they think, this guy was great, he's very intelligent, but he failed. He was unable to change anything. And until we have a better political system, a better completely reformed civil service, better machinery of state, I think a lot of these people will stay away. And if we are able to reform it, I think this will attract a lot more people in combination with some of the reforms that I've just alluded to earlier. That's it for today. As always, thank you to all our subscribers for your comments. Keep them coming, and we will try and respond to as many of you as possible.